The sun had just begun to set over Los Angeles, spilling a dim orange light across the rooftops. The air felt calm, but somewhere beneath that calmness, something dark was waiting to unfold. It was February 24, 1986, a day that should have been like any other for John Ruetten and his wife, Sherry Rasmussen. But by nightfall, everything they knew about love, trust, and safety would be shattered forever. John had always described his wife as the kind of woman who could brighten a room without trying. Sherry was intelligent, confident, and kind-hearted, the kind of person who cared deeply about everyone she met. She had achieved more in her 20-some years than most people ever would. Director of Nursing at Glendale Adventist Hospital, a role that demanded leadership and compassion, both qualities that came naturally to her. That morning, she'd been tired but cheerful. She had kissed John goodbye before he left for work, wrapped in her robe, hair slightly messy, still smiling as he walked out the door. It was an ordinary moment, the kind of moment people take for granted until it's gone. When John came home later that evening, the garage door was open. That wasn't too unusual, maybe Sherry had gone out and forgotten to close it. But then he noticed her car wasn't there. A strange feeling crawled up his spine. He climbed the stairs to the front door, only to see that it was slightly ajar. That wasn't like her. Sherry was careful, she always locked up. He pushed the door open, calling her name. The silence that followed was unnerving. Then he saw it. The living room was in chaos. Furniture overturned. Stereo equipment scattered across the floor. And there, on the carpet, lay Sherry. Still. John dropped to his knees, dialing 911 with shaking hands. When the police arrived, they tried to read the scene. To them, it looked like a break-in gone wrong, the typical chaos of a burglary turned violent. The stereo equipment was there, some drawers were open. But something didn't sit right. If it had been a robbery, why hadn't they taken anything valuable? Why was Sherry's jewelry still there? Why did the violence seem so personal? The coroner would later note the signs of a brutal struggle. Her arm bore a deep bite mark, evidence of rage, not theft. Her fingernails were broken, clawing desperately at the front door, as if she had tried to escape but couldn't. That night, the detectives began their questioning. They asked John the usual things. Had he noticed anything strange recently? Any enemies? Problems at work? But one question made him uncomfortable. Had Sherry been afraid of anyone? He hesitated, just a fraction too long. He mentioned that Sherry had been followed recently. A woman, he said. Someone who seemed obsessed with watching her. But he brushed it off quickly. Maybe it was just paranoia, maybe it was nothing. He didn't tell them everything. When John was asked to take a polygraph test, he agreed. He was nervous, anyone would be. The results came back inconclusive, showing signs of deception. But the police couldn't prove anything. Without evidence, they let him go. The investigation went cold almost immediately. The working theory was that Sherry had interrupted a robbery. But her father, Nels Rasmussen, refused to believe it. From the very beginning, something inside him screamed that this wasn't random. This was personal. In the weeks before her death, Sherry had told him about a woman who kept showing up, at the gym, in the parking lot, outside her work. She said the woman had piercing eyes, the kind that could see through you. That woman, Sherry had whispered, was John's ex-girlfriend. A police officer named Stephanie. Nels remembered that name. Sherry had told him about an argument months earlier. The ex had broken into their home once before, dressed provocatively, and confronted her. "If I can't have John, nobody can," she'd said. Sherry had been terrified, but she tried to brush it off, hoping it was over. It wasn't. When Nels told the detectives, they dismissed him immediately. They said he'd been watching too much television, but Nels wasn't convinced. He knew his daughter. He knew she would have fought with everything she had. And he also knew that whoever killed her didn't just want to steal something, they wanted to destroy her. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months. The case grew colder. John buried himself in work. He rarely spoke about Sherry. And the police, satisfied with their theory, moved on. But Nels couldn't. He replayed the details again and again. The bite mark. The missing car. The way the body had been posed. None of it fit a robbery. It looked like something else, something deeply personal, filled with emotion and anger. Years passed. The world changed. But the ache of not knowing stayed. Sherry's mother aged quickly, grief wearing her down. Nels, though, refused to stop. He wrote letters to the Lapt, to prosecutors, to anyone who would listen. He begged them to reopen the case, to test the evidence again. But his requests were always ignored. It wasn't until the 1990s, when DNA testing began to revolutionize forensic science, that Nell saw a glimmer of hope. He read every article he could find, clipping them from newspapers and saving them in a folder labeled Sherry. He called the lab again, offering to pay for DNA testing himself. They told him no. Years later, an overworked criminalist named Jennifer Francis stumbled across the old file. It was buried deep in the cold case archive, the label almost faded. She began to read. The crime scene photos disturbed her, the brutality didn't match a simple burglary. And then she saw the entry about the bite mark. It said they had tested the sample for blood type, but not for DNA. She checked the logs. No results. No follow-up. That didn't make sense. There should have been 2 DNA samples, one from Sherry, one from whoever bit her. But only one was listed. It was as if someone didn't want that second sample to exist. Francis started digging. She searched old property records, lab reports, and morgue files. It took weeks, but finally, she found it, a damaged envelope in a freezer at the coroner's office, nearly forgotten. Inside was the original swab from the bite wound. She tested it. The result came back as a match to an unknown female. The revelation was explosive. For 2 decades, police had been certain Sherry was killed by male burglars. But now, the evidence told a different story. The killer was a woman. Francis brought her findings to her supervisor. He looked at her coldly and told her to drop it. When she refused, he began questioning her mental health. Soon, she was labeled unstable. They sent her to mandatory counseling. Around the lab, people whispered that she was obsessed with a dead woman. But Francis didn't care. She knew she was right. Meanwhile, Nels kept sending letters. In one of them, he mentioned something the police had ignored from the start: John's ex-girlfriend, Stephanie Lazarus, who was now a detective at the lab. Evidence vanished. Reports were rewritten. But in 2009, everything changed. A new detective named James Nuttall joined the robbery homicide division. When he reviewed the case, he saw what Francis saw: a trail of inconsistencies that all pointed in one direction. He read Nels's letters. He reviewed the DNA results. And then, quietly, he reached out to Francis. Together, they formed a small, secret team, one they couldn't tell anyone about, not even other detectives. Because the suspect they were following her, he noticed her routine was undeniable. For the detectives who had followed cold cases for years, the moment the DNA results came back was unlike anything they had ever seen. The name glowed on the screen, stark and undeniable: Stephanie Lazarus, match confirmed. In that moment, the world seemed to stop. The killer wasn't just any suspect. She wasn't some unknown drifter, some faceless stranger. She was one of them, a veteran lab detective who had spent more than 2 decades carrying a badge, enforcing the law, and wearing the same uniform as the people now investigating her. Detective James Nuttall leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The small room felt even smaller, as if the air itself had turned heavy. His partner, Dan Jaramillo, sat silently beside him, staring at the report. Neither spoke for a long time. They both knew what this meant. Going after a fellow officer was like walking into a minefield. One wrong step and their careers, maybe even their lives, could blow apart. But truth doesn't care about badges. They had to be careful. Stephanie was smart, dangerously smart. She had decades of experience in investigations and interrogation. If she even suspected she was being watched, she would vanish behind the blue wall of silence that protected officers like her. So they planned quietly. They pulled old case files in secret, often late at night when the office was empty. They checked the original evidence logs, and that's when they discovered something else. Several key items from the Rasmussen case had been signed out over the years by unknown personnel. When they traced the handwriting on the forms, one name appeared again and again: Lazarus. It was chilling. Not only had she killed Sherry, she had also tried to bury the evidence herself. They couldn't just arrest her. Not yet. To confront someone like Stephanie Lazarus, they needed to be absolutely sure. So they dug deeper into her past, trying to understand what kind of person could commit a crime so brutal and then build a life around it. Stephanie had joined the lab in the early 1980s, fresh-faced, ambitious, and driven by something that looked like passion but sometimes felt like obsession. Colleagues remembered her as competitive, too competitive. She wasn't content with being good. She wanted to be the best. And when she set her sights on something, or someone, she didn't let go easily. That someone had been John Ruetten. Back in college, John and Stephanie had dated briefly. It wasn't serious for him, but for her, it was everything. She had fallen hard, believing he was the one. Even after he broke things off, she refused to accept it. She sent him gifts, letters, showed up at his apartment unannounced. Friends said she acted more like a shadow than an ex-girlfriend. When John met Sherry a few years later, Stephanie's behavior became erratic. She would appear at his gym, waiting for him after workouts. Once, she came to his office uninvited, dressed in nothing but a robe under her coat. Another time, she brought him cookies and cried when he refused to take them. And then, just months before Sherry's death, she had gone to their home. She confronted Sherry directly, warning her to back off. That confrontation had terrified Sherry. She had written about it in her journal, describing Stephanie as unhinged, intense, and unpredictable. Now, decades later, the detectives could see it clearly. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a slow, burning obsession that had ended in murder. But proving it was another story. They began watching Stephanie discreetly. Every morning, she followed the same routine. Gym at 6 a.m., coffee at the same cafe, work at the Van Nuys division, then home to her condo in Simi Valley. She lived alone, no husband, no kids. Her colleagues liked her. They said she was funny, loyal, and a little tough, the kind of cop who had seen it all. But under that calm surface, there was something cold. People noticed that she avoided certain conversations, especially when anyone mentioned old cases. If anyone brought up 1986, she would laugh nervously and change the subject. The more they watched, the more the detectives felt a strange mix of anger and disbelief. How could she have lived all these years with blood on her hands, going to work, laughing with friends, wearing her badge proudly, knowing what she had done? Finally, in early 2009, they decided it was time. They called the district attorney's office and explained what they had. The DA listened carefully, then asked one question: "Do you have her DNA?" "Yes," Nuttall replied. "And it matches perfectly." That was all it took. But the arrest couldn't happen like any other. She was lapped. If they arrested her publicly, it could start a war inside the department. They needed to catch her off guard, somewhere neutral, where she couldn't reach her weapon, where she would have no idea what was coming. So they set a trap. They invited her to the police headquarters under the pretense of helping with an old art theft case. It was a clever choice. Stephanie had once worked in the art theft detail, and she still loved to talk about it. The meeting would take place in an interview room, filmed quietly by hidden cameras. On the morning of June 5, 2009, Stephanie walked into the building as usual. She wore her badge proudly, her hair neatly tied back, her sidearm holstered at her waist. She smiled at the front desk officers, most of whom had no idea what was about to happen. When she entered the small interview room, she seemed relaxed. She even joked about the ancient case files on the table. But as soon as the detectives began asking questions, her expression changed. At first, the tone was light. They mentioned an old case, a burglary from the 1980s, and asked if she remembered a woman named Sherry Rasmussen. Her eyes flickered. Just for a second. She tried to laugh it off. "Oh yeah, I think my ex-boyfriend dated someone by that name." "Why?" They kept their voices calm, pretending it was just routine. But every question was designed to tighten the noose. "Did you ever meet her?" "I might have, I don't really remember." "Did you ever argue with her?" "No, not that I recall." The detectives exchanged a look. They knew she was lying, and they had proof. As the questions grew sharper, Stephanie began to sweat. Her confident smile vanished. She crossed her arms, trying to maintain control. "Look," she said, "I don't know why you're asking me this, but if you're accusing me of something, I think I should have an attorney." That was the moment. Nuttall looked at her and said quietly, "Stephanie, you're under arrest for the murder of Sherry Rasmussen." For a second, she didn't move. She just stared, eyes wide, as if she hadn't heard him. Then she laughed nervously. "You've got to be kidding me." But it wasn't a joke. 2 officers stepped into the room, disarmed her, and handcuffed her hands behind her back. She was led down the same hallway she had once walked as a respected detective, but this time, she was the criminal. News of her arrest spread like wildfire. The media couldn't believe it. A decorated officer, arrested for a decades-old murder. Her colleagues were stunned. Some defended her, insisting it was a mistake. Others stayed silent, unwilling to believe what the evidence clearly showed. The trial wouldn't come for years, but in that moment, one truth finally broke through the walls of silence. The system that had protected her for so long had finally turned on her. The lies. The cover-ups. Inside the cold walls of the Los Angeles County Jail, Stephanie Lazarus sat on her bunk, staring at the tiny square window near the ceiling. The light that came through it was faint and colorless, but she kept watching, as if it might somehow show her a way out. It had been 3 days since her arrest. 3 days since her life collapsed into a nightmare she could no longer control. She had gone from detective to prisoner in a matter of hours. Her badge, her gun, her authority, gone. The people she once commanded respect from now looked at her through glass, whispering, judging, avoiding eye contact. She was one of them now, the accused, the condemned, the forgotten. At night, she could barely sleep. The sound of the doors locking, the echo of footsteps in the hallway, and the voices of other inmates haunted her. Sometimes she thought she heard Sherry's voice too, faint but persistent, whispering her name through the silence. It made her heart race. She tried to convince herself that she didn't do anything wrong, that everything was just a misunderstanding. But deep down, she knew. The trial was still months away, but already, prosecutors were preparing their case. Every piece of evidence pointed to her. The DNA match. The old photos. The witness statements. Even her own words in that recorded interview. Her lawyer told her to stay quiet, but Stephanie couldn't stop thinking about how it all came crashing down. For more than 20 years, she had built a life on lies, and she had done it so well that she almost believed them herself. In her mind, the story still played differently. She wasn't the villain. She was the victim. She told herself that Sherry had taken everything from her, John, her happiness, her peace. Back then, it had felt unfair, like fate had betrayed her. And on that cold morning in 1986, when she drove to their house with a gun hidden under her jacket, she didn't think of it as murder. She thought of it as closure. The confrontation had been quick, chaotic, and irreversible. She remembered every sound, the screams, the struggle, the gunshots. And afterward, the silence. It had terrified her, but she didn't cry. She just left, calm and steady, as if it had been another assignment. Later that day, she went to work. She even laughed with her co-workers. No one suspected a thing. Years passed, and life went on. She rose through the ranks, solved cases, won awards, and shook hands with people who had no idea of the secret she carried. Sometimes, when she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw not a killer but a survivor, someone who had made one mistake and learned to live with it. But the past never stays buried forever. As the trial date approached, the prosecution gathered witnesses, friends, former colleagues, even John Ruetten. When John took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. He looked older, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes still carried the same quiet sadness they had when he lost Sherry. He spoke slowly, carefully choosing each word. He told the jury about Stephanie, about their college days, how she had been intense, unpredictable, and jealous. He described the gifts she sent after their breakup, the late-night phone calls, the uninvited visits. He said he always thought she would eventually move on. He never imagined she would come back with a gun. Stephanie sat just a few feet away, her hands folded, her face blank. But inside, she was burning. Hearing him speak felt like being cut open. She wanted to shout, to tell him he was wrong, that it wasn't supposed to happen like this. But the courtroom wasn't hers anymore. The control she once had was gone. Next, the forensic experts testified. They showed the jury the photos of the crime scene, Sherry's body, the blood, the broken furniture. They explained how the evidence, preserved for more than 2 decades, had finally told its story through DNA. When they said her name, Stephanie Lazarus, 100% match, the courtroom gasped. The defense tried to fight back. They argued that the evidence could have been contaminated, that the investigation had been flawed. They said Stephanie had dedicated her life to law enforcement, that she had no reason to commit such a crime. But the facts didn't lie. Then came the hardest part, the testimony from Sherry's parents. Nels Rasmussen, now an old man, walked slowly to the witness stand. His hands trembled as he held a small photo of his daughter. He looked directly at Stephanie and said, "For 23 years, we begged the police to listen. And now, we finally know why they didn't. Because the killer was one of their own." Stephanie looked away, but his words sank deep. She felt her throat tighten. For the first time in years, she couldn't hide behind her badge or her confidence. She was just a woman who had taken another woman's life, and now, she was being forced to face it. When the closing arguments came, the courtroom was tense. The prosecutor stood before the jury, holding up a photo of Sherry and John on their wedding day. This was supposed to be the start of their life together, he said. But jealousy, obsession, and rage ended it. The defendant, a sworn officer of the law, used her training not to protect, but to destroy. Stephanie's lawyer spoke next, pleading for mercy. She has served this city honorably for decades. She is not a monster. She is a human being who made a mistake. But the jury didn't see a mistake. They saw a pattern, a woman who had planned, executed, and hidden a murder for decades. When the verdict came, the courtroom was silent. The foreman stood and said, "We find the defendant, Stephanie Lazarus, guilty of first-degree murder." The words hit like thunder. Stephanie closed her eyes. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she looked up, her expression cold and unreadable. The judge's voice echoed as he read the sentence, 27 years to life. As the bailiffs led her away, she glanced one last time at John. He didn't look back. In the quiet of her new cell that night, Stephanie finally stopped pretending. She sat on her bed and thought about everything, the choices, the lies, the years of silence. The anger that had once fueled her was gone, replaced by something emptier. She realized that, in trying to destroy someone else's happiness, she had destroyed her own. Outside, the world moved on. Sherry's family finally found peace. John rebuilt his life, though a part of him would always be haunted. The Lapt faced harsh criticism, accused of protecting one of their own for too long. And Stephanie Lazarus became a name whispered in every police academy, a warning that sometimes, evil doesn't come from outside the law. It wears a badge. Years later, in interviews, retired detectives still talked about the case. They said it wasn't just about murder. It was about betrayal. The kind that cuts deeper because it comes from someone who once stood beside you. And as Stephanie aged behind bars, her reflection in the metal mirror became her only companion. The face she saw was no longer that of a confident detective, but of a woman forever trapped in the shadow of her own crime. The world had forgotten her. But the silence she created, that moment in 1986, would echo forever. The years passed like shadows crawling across the walls. Inside the California Institution for Women, Stephanie Lazarus grew older, her hair turning gray, her once confident stride reduced to slow, measured steps. She had once walked proudly through police hallways, her badge glinting under fluorescent lights. Now, the sound of her footsteps echoed down concrete corridors where every door locked from the outside. At first, she resisted the truth. She told herself that she had been framed, that the evidence was wrong, that the DNA was contaminated. But time has a way of stripping away illusions. Years of silence, years of isolation, they made her see what she had tried to bury. Every night, she dreamed of the same thing. A house filled with light. A woman's laughter. Then, gunshots. And when she woke up, she would still hear them echoing in her head. The guilt came and went like waves, sometimes sharp and unbearable, other times dull and hollow. She tried to distract herself with routines, laundry duty, kitchen shifts, reading old crime novels that once inspired her. But none of it could drown out the voice in her head. You were supposed to protect people, not kill them. She remembered the morning of the murder like it had happened yesterday. The sound of the car engine. The cool air. The gun heavy in her hand. She told herself it would be quick, that it would end the pain of seeing John with someone else. But when it was over, when Sherry's body hit the floor, everything inside her broke. 4 decades, she buried it under the weight of her uniform. She solved cases, shook hands, received medals, and every time someone called her Detective Lazarus, she felt like she was getting away with it. But deep down, she always knew that one day, the truth would claw its way out. In prison, time didn't move forward, it only circled back. The faces of the people she'd arrested flashed before her eyes. The screams, the sirens, the crime scenes. Now, she was the criminal. The irony was bitter. Sometimes, she saw Sherry's face in the shadows of her cell. Not the bruised, lifeless face from the crime scene photos, but smiling, radiant, alive. Sherry would just look at her, silently. And Stephanie would whisper, "I'm sorry," even though she knew it was useless. In 2023, 37 years after the murder, the parole board called her in. She had grown frail but sharp-eyed. Her once controlled voice trembled slightly when she spoke. 4 years, she had denied everything, clinging to the hope of release. But that day, something shifted inside her. When the board asked if she had anything to say, she paused. The room was quiet. Then, for the first time in her life, she said the words she had avoided for decades. "I killed Sherry Rasmussen." The confession didn't come from guilt alone, it came from exhaustion. From carrying a secret too heavy to bear. She explained, almost coldly, how jealousy and rage had consumed her. How she had watched John move on, unable to let go. How, on that February morning, she lost control of everything human inside her. When she was done, the room was silent. Even the board members didn't speak for a while. Then one of them asked, "Do you feel remorse?" Stephanie looked down. Her hands trembled. "Yes," she said quietly. "But I think it's too late for that to matter." They denied her parole. She returned to her cell, knowing she would die behind those walls. But for the first time, she didn't fight it. For the first time, she felt something close to peace. Not forgiveness, not redemption, just acceptance. That same year, the recording of her confession was played at a parole hearing, not for her, but for history. For Sherry's family, who had waited nearly 4 decades to hear her admit what they had always known. By then, Nels Rasmussen had passed away. But before his death, he recorded a statement. It was simple, yet powerful. "If you look at the damage she did to my daughter's face," he said, "it's like she wanted to destroy the beauty that Sherry exuded." His words were played for the board, his voice trembling but defiant. The video ended, and in the stillness that followed, everyone felt the weight of what had been lost, not just Sherry, but all the years that could have been, all the lives that were changed because one woman couldn't control her rage. Outside the prison, life continued. Sherry's sisters grew older, their children married, and the family carried on the legacy she left behind. Her niece, inspired by her story, became a nurse just like her. She said, "When I'm with my patients, I think of Aunt Sherry. I think about how she loved to help people. That's how I keep her alive." The wedding photos from years later showed a quiet tribute, a white lace ribbon sewn into a dress, taken from Sherry's old wedding gown. A symbol of remembrance, woven into new beginnings. Meanwhile, Stephanie spent her remaining years quietly. She rarely spoke, except to a few inmates who didn't know her story. Sometimes she drew small sketches, faces, hands, fragments of things she remembered from her old life. Once, she drew a police badge lying broken on the floor, the number scratched out. When a guard asked her what it meant, she said softly, "It means the law doesn't protect everyone." In her final years, she grew weak. The doctor said her heart was failing. In her last days, she stopped eating, stopped talking. She spent hours just sitting near the tiny window, watching the sunlight crawl across the walls. One morning, the guard found her sitting upright, her eyes open but lifeless, her hands folded in her lap. The light had faded from the window, and with it, whatever was left of her. No one came to claim the body. The lap didn't hold a memorial. The few officers who remembered her refused to speak publicly. She was buried in an unmarked grave, her name written only on a temporary tag. But for those who knew the story, for the detectives who reopened the case, for Jennifer Francis who risked her career to expose the truth, for the family who never stopped fighting, her death was not the end. It was the final page in a story that had already written its legacy in pain, in persistence, and in justice. Years later, documentaries, articles, and podcasts would retell the story of Stephanie Lazarus, the detective who killed out of love, the system that failed to see it, and the family that refused to give up. People around the world watched, horrified yet fascinated, wondering how someone who swore to protect could become a murderer. Psychologists later studied her case, calling it a textbook example of cognitive dissonance, a person living 2 opposing lives until one consumed the other. A professional facade built over a core of jealousy, control, and obsession. In crime classrooms and police ethics courses, instructors showed her mugshot and said, "This is why character matters more than training." And somewhere in Los Angeles, near the house where it all began, the street remains quiet. The townhouse where Sherry died is home to another family now. Children play in the driveway, unaware of the story that unfolded there decades ago. The echoes of that day are gone, but the scar on history remains. Because some crimes don't end when the killer is caught. Became a light for others to follow, even as the shadow of her killer faded into oblivion. The world didn't remember Stephanie Lazarus as a detective. It remembered her as a. The story of Sherry Rasmussen didn't end in blood. It ended in truth. And that truth, no matter how long it took, finally found its way home.